Hello, and welcome to a special edition of Up Close on METV. I'm Charles Clapsaddle, Station Manager for Manatee Educational Television. Domestic Violence Awareness Month evolved from the Day of Unity in October 1981, conceived by the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. The intent was to connect advocates across the nation who were working to end violence against women and their children. 24 years ago, October 1987, the first Domestic Violence Awareness Month was observed. Then, like now, Domestic Violence Awareness Month allows us to mourn those who have died because of domestic violence, celebrate those that have survived, and connect those that work to end domestic violence. Today, to discuss domestic violence in Manatee County, we have with us a really great panel. Joining us is Kathy Wilson with Manatee Glens. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And what is your exact title?
Well, my exact title is the Assistant Director to Children's Outpatient Programs at Manatee Glens, but more importantly for this panel, I work really closely with HOPE and domestic violence victims. I run the Rape Crisis Program at Manatee Glens.
And we look forward to hearing all of the things that Manatee Glens has to offer.
Thank you.
Also joining us is Detective Perry with the Manatee Sheriff's Office. Detective Perry, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And you're intimately involved with going after perpetrators of domestic violence, is that correct?
Yes, I am one of the domestic violence investigators for the Manatee County Sheriff's Office. And through the Project Safekeeping Grant, I work also with the state's attorney's office. I assist in prosecution, so I'm almost also like a liaisons officer.
And we want to hear all about what the sheriff and law enforcement is doing to go after perpetrators of domestic violence.
Right.
And last, but certainly not least, is probably one of the hardest working women in Manatee County. A woman whose commitment, expertise, and level of effort has really made a difference for domestic violence in Manatee County. And that's Laurel Lynch, the Executive Director of Hope Family Services. Laurel, so nice to see you again, and thank you for putting this program together.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Charles. I so appreciate your support.
Now, October, you know, every year October rolls around. What's the importance of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and why are we bringing this awareness?
Well, and I thought in your opening, I thought you were brilliant. Really, it's a time for us to let the community know that we really are taking a stand against domestic violence here in Manatee County. We work closely with Manatee Glens, with the Sheriff's Department. The Sheriff has made it very clear for years that this is unacceptable. And so it's kind of a twofold goal. We want to reach people who still may not know we exist. There is help available from any of us if you need help. That's really important that people know that. But in addition, that it's just not acceptable in Manatee County. We want folks to understand that the behavior belongs to a perpetrator. That person needs to learn how to deal with their control issues in a different way than being violent with their family members.
Well, the question then arises, and I want to pose this to all of you, just how big a problem is domestic violence in Manatee County? And Detective Perry, you know, what are some of the numbers that you can tell us? I mean, is it a growing problem?
Well, we can definitely see that there is a growing problem with domestic violence. You know, it's just not in Manatee County, it's all over. The economy today has placed undue pressure on families. They're resorting to violent behaviors, whether they're self-medicating, they're becoming more depressed, and anytime you use any type of outside substance to try to assist you in your own feelings, it ends up in violence.
So drug and alcohol abuse play a big part.
Definitely.
And what about at Manatee Glens? Do you see an increase in services that you're providing?
Yes, definitely. We over the last couple years, we have increased in our services. We are, just like with Laurel, working really closely with them because we do have a lot of victims who we hope to help them through the process to become survivors. But they have both the domestic violence and the sexual violence going on in their relationships. And so, yeah, we've seen a huge increase, the volume of which is staggering. And we have full-time people working, nonstop 24 hours a day to help, support the victims that we have.
Now, Laurel, you and I have had programs about domestic violence in the past, and you consistently set the standard for the services and the resources that are provided to victims. But each year there's new indicators of what's increasing, and as Detective Perry mentioned, the economy is a big thing. There's a lot more people out of work. Drug and alcohol abuse. There's a lot of indicators that kind of lead to domestic violence.
That's right.
What do you see at Hope Family Services?
Well, last year, our fiscal year is a little different than the calendar year. We are a July 1st through June 30th. And so a year ago, the previous complete fiscal year was our first year in a new facility. When we designed the facility, the new shelter, we designed it, okay, how many beds do we need today if we were going to move today? And that was about, 22, 23, maybe 24. 35-bed shelter was supposed to last us 10 years, and so the board of directors wouldn't have to revisit this conversation for at least 10 years. We have been at or over capacity since a week after we moved in. The second full year there, we had 303 women, children, and 2 men in that span of time. The year that just ended, June 30th, this next fiscal year, our second complete year, 437.
Wow.
There were days we were so far over capacity, I would say to the shelter director, I'm not coming over today because I don't know where you're put. We only have 35 beds. What do you mean? Oh, is anybody from zoning watching? Because I probably shouldn't say this on camera, but there was one day we had 40-some people. I said, I know how many beds. I pay the bill. Help me figure this out. What do you have, kids under the sink? What are you doing here? And really what they were doing is putting kids, little ones, head to toe, and then the other end of the bed, the head to toe. Because if they're little, I mean, they're 2 years old, you can put 2 kids in a bed. But it's not the greatest environment. People are crabby, they're crowded. And I just want to circle back. Well, we know the economy absolutely has some impact on this crime. And people are medicating in record numbers. I don't think it necessarily is only domestic violence. I think just regular folks like you and me are stressed. Our bills are increasing too. But one of the things I keep coming back to is, I have stress in my life. You have stress in your life. I don't go home and drop kick my dog or my husband because I've had a bad day. The violence is the choice of the perpetrator. And there's a lot of people who are stressed. Road rage is increasing. I mean, we can talk about that all day long and we use up the entire time. Again, it's still a choice that this batterer makes, because he doesn't go to work generally and punch out his boss. He does it at home.
And that's something that we want to take a few minutes to talk about. But I must say one thing, thank goodness there is a facility like Hope Family Services, being able to serve out there, because if there wasn't a facility like Hope Family Services, where would these people go? And what would they have to put up with?
And we worry about that because I will tell you honestly, the numbers seem to be leveling off. The explosion we had last year is kind of flat right now. But if it continued, our conversation internally was, what do we do now? We've already built the bigger shelter. I can't raise another $2 million to build another big shelter.
And that's the question. What are we doing? What are all of these facilities? What is this community? What are we doing to help combat domestic violence? And Detective Perry, what are you at the Sheriff's Office? What are the programs? What's our next steps here?
Well, one of the things that we're doing is we have increased arrests for the batterer in a domestic violence situation. And although we are arresting them and we're putting them in jail, we're making sure that they are referred to a certified batterers intervention program. Because just putting a batterer in jail because he batters just doesn't solve the problem. It's a very deep emotional crime, and it starts within the person. It's not just like a public community type crime. It's a family crime. So there has to be other individuals out there that will help with the battering and assist the victim in regaining power and control back in her family.
And that's an important part, is that, you know, if perpetrators feel that they're removed from, you know, prosecution, they have a tendency to get back into the same crime over and over and over again.
Right, if there's no intervention.
But you have a new initiative, don't you, Laurel? And that's why we're joined by this panel today. And that initiative is going to take some pretty deep steps. What are they?
We've seen more of each other in the last few months than we've seen in years. The county is the lead agency, wrote a grant. It was a phenomenal grant. It's from the Office of Violence Against Women, the Department of Justice. There was hundreds of thousands of applicants, and Manatee County was successfully awarded this grant. It's called Project Safekeeping, and it brings all these community partners together to really hold batterers accountable and increase prosecution. Because the research shows, at least this is what the information we get from OVW, that the research has shown that a trip to jail, while may not be perfect, slows things down, and we can intervene with it. We have a sort of entree into talking to that victim at that time.
Right.
So, and it's not only for domestic violence, it also incorporates sexual violence. If you're a sexual assault victim in Manatee County, unfortunately right now, which is changing, and Kathy can speak to this, you've been traumatized, you're in with everybody else at the emergency room, and the wait is nothing short of ridiculous.
Yes.
I mean, you're feeling pretty bad to start with. So this grant also not only brought domestic violence awareness to the forefront in our community, but it really laid out some great new things for the sexual violence programs, this training more sane nurses, and Kathy is better to speak to that as the expert.
We want to hear about that, but kind of define the scope of what this new project. It's going to involve law enforcement and the judicial and some of the care and resource providers, and what else is involved in this Project Safekeep?
We're having 3 community forums. The first one was John and Jane Q. Public to come in and help us work through what they see as the gaps. We can't fill gaps if we don't know what they are.
Sure.
So it was mostly providers, people who are involved. I mean, somebody in off the street probably doesn't have a big interest in sitting there just to hear what we all have to say. And it was a great full-day forum. Our second one is coming up, and it's with law enforcement, and it's really going to focus on trauma, the impact of trauma on crime victims. And then we have one scheduled in 2012 for the judiciary, because it's really going to take all of us work. I mean, you know that expression about takes a village? I didn't, obviously, somebody else coined it. But really, that is so true. Hope is great and wonderful, and I love what we do, but we're one small piece of the pie. Manatee Glens is a piece, the sheriff's office. We need the judges on board with us as well.
And collectively, you know, there's more strength to be able to deal with a problem than, you know, sort of segmented areas dealing with it. Now, Kathy, you know, Laurel mentioned the fact that you're doing a lot more with outreach in the community. What are some of those things that you're involved with, you know, in trying to develop your side of the equation?
Well, part of the collaboration with the grant was to increase the awareness of sexual violence in our county, which is huge, but also work on the training issue and getting the medical needs met of our victims. And so one major part of the Project Safekeeping was to train SANE nurses, which is sexual assault nurse examiner. So a nurse that is especially trained in sexual assault exams, and then take that, to kind of take that exam out of the ERs where it is now, and start a SANE center where victims could go and get their exams done at the center instead
without
of
having to suffer the trauma of being in the middle of a hospital or an emergency room. They have a facility that we can go through where it's somewhat more confidential, perhaps,
yes,
or
more
more
home-like.
comforting.
Yes, it's just more home-like. It's more. It lessens the trauma and lessens the secondary trauma that we often do, and we give to a lot of our victims. Unfortunately, it happens no matter what we do, but we would like to lessen that and make the time
an excellent
go
idea.
by faster. It gives a place for the detectives to come and speak to the victims, and not in their squad cars or down at the
Right.
station. It's just it's a lot better for the victim overall, and so that's part of the collaboration, which has just been great to be able to do.
Well, that's an excellent advantage to have a place, and I would say from law enforcement's perspective, it's much more of an atmosphere where one can get the information and try to make a case, then rather than in the midst of an emergency room where there's perhaps dozens and dozens
Right.
of patients running around.
No privacy.
And more privacy, a critical issue. Now, from the law enforcement's perspective, what are some of the key things that you see in this consortium that you've been putting together?
Well, I can tell you that we have great communication, not only with just Hope Family Service and Manatee Glen's rape crisis, but other agencies out there as well. We have actually learned more about different agencies and outreach centers that are out there that we didn't even know existed. So we basically are like a tree that has grown all these branches, and we're able to touch all these areas and provide the best assistance for the victim. There's victims, their needs are sometimes what you wouldn't expect. But with the agencies and centers out there, we can meet the needs of the victims that are out in our county.
Well, that's a great analogy of being able to, kind of like a tree, kind of reaching out and being able to shade and comfort a lot of things.
Right.
Now, Laurel, you've been involved with, with Hope Family Services for many years. What is do you, from a Hope Family Services perspective, what is the most important part of this new Operation Safekeeping?
Just one, huh?
It's only a 30-minute show, but
okay, I'll try to. I think, well, we've always collaborated. There's hey, Kathy, let me call you. Let me call Kathy over at Rape Crisis. We need something for somebody we're serving. It's been always very informal and sort of as needed. It's put us together in a new way that, while I can still pick up the phone and call, we have, I think, using the tree analogy, it's given us roots that are deeper into the ground so that we as organizations are far more rock solid. A tree can only grow as large as that root system will let it develop, and we are better as organizations. Our communication is better. I have a better understanding of what's happening. So we were talking about trauma recently, and I've known about, we do trauma-informed services, but it was more accidentally because we knew people had something happen to them. We didn't maybe know what the word was, but certainly you have bad dreams and nightmares and you're afraid after someone's battered you. We didn't always know the need, even though we have counselors. We just didn't put labels on those kinds of things. Well, now, Manatee Glen's is part of a project, and this whole trauma-informed care is on everybody's radar, and we're talking about it in different ways, and suddenly it helps us broaden what we can offer. Again, more agencies on the more limbs on the tree, and now more leaves on a limb, and deeper roots. And deeper roots. That's
so we're gonna use this analogy, and I think it's a perfect analogy for this, because this is a community. A community is far flung. It's I'm sure that the services that you offer are throughout Manatee County, from every corner of it, and this is a far flung community, and there's limited resources that are available. So if people know about these resources, they can start utilizing them. But I want to take a few minutes and talk about, what do you see, and we'll start with Kathy if we may. What do you see, what are your long-term, what are the goals that you want to have this partnership achieve?
Well, they're so far-reaching. I agree with Laurel that we've always been connected, but with this program and this project, we've been able to really connect to understand each other on a different level. which I think is always great. I think before we talk about the economy always as a bad thing, and it certainly has been a horrible thing as we've gone through it. But one thing it did do is it got all organizations to really work together, because we all could do it on our own. We know we can, and we all want to feel like we can. But when you work together, you do, you provide and you fill in those gaps for those victims that you might not be able to do just solo on alone. So I really feel that there's endless possibilities for us as we collaborate more and more, and that victims will then become, like we said, survivors, and it won't be that stigma of a victim any longer. They'll be a survivor, and they can go to the walks we have and the different awareness months and feel good and feel good about themselves, because they aren't at fault. And that's the thing we want to do is shift the focus of the victim from the victim to the perpetrator.
And you know, it's an excellent point. And you know, Detective, I want you to comment on this. Is, you know, domestic violence is devastating, you know, to an individual, and especially with children and everything. It's a devastating thing. So, Detective, what are some of those goals that you want to see achieved with this ongoing partnership?
Well, I have to agree with a lot of what Kathy has said. Just the empowerment of the victim, and the community needs to see that the primary victim, of course, and I don't wish to be sexist, but is usually the female. She's not the only victim. If there's children in the home, they are victims also. And with this program, we have been able to make collaborative efforts with our Safe Children Coalitions, our Child Protective Services, and we are also reaching the needs of those children, because those children in the home are also victims, and for years they were the silent victims, and we are really bringing them to the surface and saying, hey, we're going to work with you, we're going to try to make your life okay.
Well, I think that's a terrific, because they are victims, you know, and children are the victims. Now, Laura, you know, we were kind of winding down a little bit, and I want to touch on a few other things. But, you know, Hope has always been at the vanguard of going after domestic violence and providing great resources throughout the community. When this was coming together, this project, what did you see as the goals for Hope in this Operation Safeguard?
You can do more on less when you're organized and efficient. And that's sort of, that's who I am. Kathy's a therapist, Carrie's a detective, I'm a bean counter. Really, Excel spreadsheets calm me down. I love the numbers and the business end of things. I have passion for the issue, but I got to run a business too.
Sure.
And here we've been talking about the economy and sort of skirted around it, but what we really haven't sort of honed in on is we have all been forced to do more on less, because folks are coming through the door and we're never going to turn them away because I have fewer staff members.
Right.
That's just not okay. So it's not only the collaboration has, my goal was very simple. I have just one sort of driving force when I get up every day and go to work. It's how can I make life better for victims and survivors of domestic violence in Manatee? That is who I am. And how do I do that when donations are not like they were 5 and 10 years ago? It's not even close. And yet there is this tide of people, this huge explosion of requests for help, and I still want to offer the same quality we did. And we have been able, through economies of scale, we can do more on less because we are organized and in this together. And when you look at some of the intangible, some of the non-measurable things, we have a forum later this week for law enforcement that I referenced earlier. There is a gentleman coming that Kathy and I got to meet. You've met him a couple of times. I met him in Washington last year. His title is so long we don't have enough time, but he's a distinguished professor at a university in South Carolina, and he's an expert on the impact of trauma to crime victims, and he's coming in to do a training for law enforcement. Now you think, law enforcement, arrest the bad person, send them to jail, that's their job. And yet now here we are going to have this training for and it's really the higher ups in the organizations on trauma. This, you think about cops, you don't think of them as suddenly being social workers. And we're not asking them to be social workers.
But what great training.
But maybe if they have a better understanding of what that person's up against when they're in this, again, I have to defer to Kathy because I don't know what it's called, but there's this phase right after you've been victimized where you're not, your story may change, you're scared, all you can think of is he's going to come back, I don't want any more problem. If they understand that, what a far-reaching positive impact that will have in our community.
Absolutely, and I can see that that as being a very valuable tool not only for law enforcement but for all the professionals and resource providers. And let me just correct you on one thing. You're more than just a bean counter. You're a real visionary and an advocate as well. So,
well, thank you.
And on top of being
I'll pay you later.
But I want to go around the table one time and find out from each one of you, what do you, and there's people out there who will be watching this program who know someone, or maybe they're the, the victim of domestic violence. What do you want that person to know that's struggling with the decision about domestic violence? Kathy, what would you say to them?
I would say they have many numbers. I know that are going to be on the screen, and they don't need to worry about which one they're going to choose. Just call one.
There's Manatee Glens has a rape crisis hotline.
Yes, and if they're a domestic violence victim and they're calling the rape crisis hotline, we will help them just as much and get them to where they need to be. We're all collaborating together. So what I would like to say is to take that step to call and reach out, that many of those people have not been helped before, maybe by some fault of an organization or not, or maybe because they just feel like nobody's going to believe them, to know that our organizations believe the victims. We believe them. We want them to reach out. And all they have to do is reach out, and we will do the rest. We will help them to empower them, like Carrie said, to be better, to get out of what situation they're in, to help them do what they need to do to be safe.
To keep them safe, which is
them
critical.
Safe. Exactly. And then at the same time, worry about what's going on with the perpetrator, and that's important because we want them to know that whatever's going on, it's not their fault, and that they can get help.
And detective, the same question for you, because a lot of times people will first call the sheriff's department if they see somebody being beaten up or abused or whatever. What would be your advice if they know somebody or they're subjected to that? What is your advice?
Well, they need to come forward because we're not going to be able to help them if we don't know where they are or who they are. And for the victim themselves, they need to understand that they are no longer going to be alone. Women who are in domestic violence situations tend to become introverted, and they hold everything within, and they feel like there is no one out there, there isn't anything, I'm just going to have to deal with this my own way. Well, she doesn't have to deal with it in her own way anymore. There's so many services and people out there that will make sure that she gets what she needs, and we will make sure that she is not alone.
And that was the methodology for many, many years. People suffered this as a kind of a silent type of thing. But now there's, thanks to places like Hope Family Services, you can bring this to the forefront. You can get help. Laurel, I want you to kind of summarize. You've been such a wonderful advocate for many years, for people who have been the victims of domestic violence. What do you want them to know? If they're out there right now and they know someone, or maybe they're subjected to domestic violence, what would be that key thing that you'd like them to know?
The hardest thing they will ever feel they have to do is pick up the phone and call and ask for help. But I think in comparison to what they're living with, it's really much easier. As everyone has said here, if we can't help you if we don't know you're there.
Right.
You're not comfortable calling law enforcement for whatever reason, that's fine. We are not going to suddenly, call. I'm not going to call Carrie because you called Hope.
Right.
Even if you don't tell us your name, call and get a safety plan. 95% of the people killed at the hands of their significant other in Florida never reached out for help. So that tells me what we do works. We can help you, but not if you don't call.
Thanks, Laura. And Detective and Kathy, thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedules to share with us some of this really valuable and I think life-saving information. I think it's something that this community needs to know about, and this new coalition, consortium, however you want to define it, I think is going to be a very valuable tool in the future and as you go forward. And we'd like to extend perhaps the invitation to you that, as this grows and prospers and develops, perhaps come back and talk a little bit about the successes that I'm sure that you're going to have. Thank you to our panel for sharing information on this important topic. For more information about domestic violence, including warning signs for emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, visit HOPE's website at hopefamilyservice.org or call 755-6805.